I remember as a kid, this game was quite something to play. I remember it dark, eerie, and with an oppressive atmosphere. The game was originally made in English, and as a Spanish speaker back in my childhood I had no idea about English. Now I have the C18 level and I understand everything. Was it like I remember? Let's find out. Attention, this video contains many spoilers. It is possible that I may miss details or secrets of the game, I am not perfect. The things I say here are my personal opinion and experience, at no time I do claim to be in possession of the absolute truth. When you start the game, you can choose from 3 characters: Warrior, Rogue, and Sorcerer. Each character has advantages and disadvantages and a unique ability. I always choose the Sorcerer. It was only recently I discovered that he is the most overpowered character. We start in a town called Tristram. The town is really small and there is only a few NPCs. Like Farham, the drunk, that he will only tell you some stories. We also have Cain the Elder that identifies items, Gilligan the barmaid that he also only tells you stories, Griswold the blacksmith that sell items and repair equipment, Ogden the innkeeper, Pepin the healer that sells life potions and heals you for free, Worth, the boy with the wooden leg, sells you very expensive items and charges you 50 gold to just let you see them. Adria the witch sells mana potions, scrolls, spellbooks, and also recharges the spells on the magic staves. Sometimes you can find a dying man called Kyle Reels, which reminds me of Kyle Reese from Terminator. You can talk, and you should talk to all these NPCs. Sometimes they give you useful information and they can also give you quests that you can skip accidentally and lose the reward. Although most of the time they don't say anything important except the person who gave you the quest itself. Let's talk a bit about the game mechanics and then the missions. The game is a point-and-click RPG with an isometric perspective, which means it's a role-playing game with a top-down view whose interaction between the game and the player is based on pointing with the mouse and clicking. Usually the scenarios are quite dark and you have to rely on a ring of light around the player. Also, the character has a direct line of sight, which means he can see anything except what's directly in line with him. You can't see through walls, nor around corners or on the sides of a door, even if the door is open, unless you pass through it, which means you can be ambushed easily. Characters have 4 main attributes from which almost all the important game parameters are generated. The strength defines your damage. Magic defines your mana and the spells you can learn. Dexterity defines the percentage of hits in melee and damage with bows. And the vitality defines the amount of life and damage you can withstand. Additionally, some items will have restriction depending on your stats. For example, bows require dexterity and some magic wands require magic, even if they cannot be used to cast spells from them. When you kill monsters, you level up and you can allocate points to the attribute of your choice, but there are some limits. The sorcerer cannot have much strength, the warrior cannot have much magic, and the rogue is in a middle point between these two but can have a great dexterity. Each character also has a special ability. These 3 skills are conceptually funny but quite useless. The warrior can repair stuff, the rogue can disarm traps, and the sorcerer can recharge stabs. The conventional attack, when attacking an enemy, depends on your dexterity. You will have a percentage chance of hitting them. If you hit it, the damage is your weapon plus your strength or your dexterity if it's a bow. Regarding magic, it is something special, since spells will automatically hit if they simply touch the enemy and will always apply a fixed range of damage depending on the type of spell and the level at which you have learned it. Spells are divided into 4 categories, which the first ones being very abundant and the last ones you will be lucky to learn any of them. The problem is how the magic is learned, not with level or experience point, but with books that you will find either during the game or bought from Adria the Witch. This will allow you to save and load the game compulsively in front of her so her inventory refreshes till you find the spell you want. But even so, there are spells that are very difficult to obtain, and even if you spend hours trying, you might not see them. There are many different spells, the majority causing fire or lightning damage. Some enemies will be resistant or even immune to one of those types of damage, so it's important to learn them both. One of the most important spells is the Town Portal. Luckily, it's very easy to find scrolls or buy them from the shop. Some spells will also have special effects, like the Stone Curse, which will allow to turn an enemy into rock for a few seconds, that can be quite useful. Also, the Bone Spirit causes a special percentage damage to the enemy. There are also 2 teleportation spells, one randomly teleports you around your current location and the other teleports you to where you have the cursor at the moment. But without a doubt, the spell that completely unbalances the game is the mana shield. This spell makes your mana count as if it were also life. At first glance it seems interesting but not too important, but nothing could be further from the truth. If you use the sorcerer, the mana shield should be one of the first things you learn or get, whether through stabs or scrolls. As I have said before, the way to attack with spells is special, since it does not depend on strength or dexterity, so for a sorcerer only vitality and magic are important. But with the mana shield we can focus on only raising the magic attribute every time you level up, while the other characters will have to maintain a balance between vitality, dexterity and strength to be able to attack properly. This allows you to have an enormous amount of mana, and if you add to this the fact that there are magical items that further increase your mana and your magic attribute, you can end up having so much that is absurd, making you virtually immortal against anything and making life potions completely pointless. This mana shield build for the sorcerer is so powerful that apparently led to challenges of completing the entire game with the sorcerer without using a single piece of equipment, or even using only curse equipment pieces that give you negative properties. I've completed the game several times with all the 3 characters, and I must say that the difficulty curve varies. With the warrior it's very easy at the beginning, but it gets very difficult towards the end. With the sorcerer it's the opposite, you get killed a lot at the beginning, especially by strong monsters like the butcher. With the rogue the difficulty level is moderate through. Now regarding the items, in this game there are very few slots for equipment, especially compared to other entries in the series that came later. Also there is no stash and your inventory, as I said, is not too big. You move very slowly and sometimes it's a real torture having to go to see Adria or Worth, because they are in the most remote parts of the town. You will have to go to sell and buy frequently, especially in the later levels where there is more loot and you need more potions. There isn't a great variety of weapons and armor, but it's not too bad, it doesn't feel too limited. Luckily, you can drop items on the ground and as long as you don't start a new game, they will still be there. There are normal items, also magical items that will have 1 or 2 special properties, which can be negative by the way, and unique ones with many properties and their own proper name. You can equip unidentified items, which you couldn't do in other games. You won't know what they do, but you can guess by looking at the stats. Magical items are rare, especially at the beginning. When you reach Hell there are quite a few. Unique items are extremely rare, usually obtained as quest reward. During the 3 times I completed the game to make this video, I only once had it randomly dropped by an enemy. I thought that couldn't happen at all. Another difference this game has from its sequels is you can save the game whenever you want. You must save the game to avoid losing progress if you die. As here, if you die, you only have the option to reload the whole game or start over. You can choose to restart after dying or at any time at will. You don't lose your level or your inventory, but whatever you left on the ground disappears. Actually that can be pretty useful. I did it with the sorcerer 3 times to ensure I had sufficient level of the most basic spells before I continue in the dungeon. Okay, now let's talk about the story. When you arrive, Ogden, the innkeeper, speaks to you as if you were someone important, as if you were from the nobility. He tells you that things have changed a lot since you lived here. Dark knights have murdered and enslaved much of the population, and the church, not the cathedral, church, has been desecrated with dark rituals. He also says that some of the inhabitants might still have survived and asks you to go and check. If you talk to the others, they tell you more information. Griswold, for example, tells you that the Archbishop Lazarus led a group of men to rescue Prince Albrecht, the youngest son of the king. But the problem is everything was full of demons, especially one particularly powerful wielding a butcher's axe. Griswold saved the boy Worth, but not before the butcher had cut off one of his legs. Farnham was also part of the rescue team and witnessed how the demons and the butcher killed their enemies in front of him, which made him lose his mind and now spends the whole day drinking. Pepin the healer also tells you about the wounds of the survivors and how particularly difficult they were to treat, as if they had some special infectious demonic venom. But when did all this happen? From the stories, it seems like it happened a long time ago. Worth's wounds are already healed, and Ogden the innkeeper tells you that if it weren't for his tavern's food reserve, the village would have already died of hunger. But on the contrary, we will later see in the story that the kidnapping of Prince Albrecht and the butcher killing village inhabitants is something that is happening right at the moment. It's a bit confusing. We go to the church and we can see some light coming from inside, quite a disturbing atmosphere. The first 4 levels simulate being the basement of a church, decorated with Christian iconography, not very abundant but is common to find crucifixes. It must be a gigantic church. I have been to a couple of the largest cathedrals in the world and I tell you they don't fit as much crap as there is here. The maps are procedural, which means it is random but following some guidelines to make some logical sense. Even so, it's quite normal to find the stairs to the next level immediately right next to each other. And although the maps are random, the variables for randomness are not very complex, because after playing many times you start to see that there are sections that repeat between games. The main mission consists on exploring the labyrinth beneath the church. Normally, there is nothing stopping you from running to find the stairs that take you down to the next level. Anyway, I don't recommend this. It's better to explore as the difficulty and the enemies become much harder as you go deeper. Regarding the enemies, there isn't much variety, although it doesn't feel too repetitive. They also fall into the video game cliché where they change the color and the name of the same enemy model and that makes it a new one. On the first levels, enemies will be quite weak and stereotypical, like skeleton, zombies, small animals called scavengers, and small humanoids demon called fallen. Starting from the second level, you begin to encounter special enemies with their own names and usually much more powerful, some of them absurdly so for the level of your character at that moment. From here, you will also start to find parts of the scenario related to side objectives, like the Butcher, the Skeleton King, or the Underground Passage. I will talk about the side missions later. Each level, despite having similar design, feels like a new place due to certain details like color nuances and the gradual introduction of new enemies. Upon reaching level 5, we arrive at the Catacombs. Now the levels look more like a ruinous basement, the typical place full of cobwebs with walls and ceiling half collapsed. Whenever there is a radical change in the style of the scenarios, 2 things will happen. The first is that somewhere on the map there will be a quick way to go up to the town without having to use the portal spell. In this case, it creates an entrance in the town through one of the crypts in the church cemetery. So if for some reason you run out of portal spells, you won't have to go walking all the way back to level 1. The second thing that happens are the enemies. In addition to the previous one, many more will appear, each with a more demonic look, as if the deeper you go, the literally closer you are to hell. We have goat men, huge rhino demons that will charge at you, small flying goblins that attack with magic, beasts that shoot acid causing a lot of damage, stone gargoyles that come to life as you approach them, demons that look the same as the Butcher from level 2 but they are not nearly as difficult, and my favorites, because as a child they scare the shit out of me. I am talking about the stalkers, or lurkers, monsters with long claws and the power to become invisible except when they are about to attack you. These nasty creatures take a lot of life, and often their blows will cause your character to freeze for a fraction of a second, often long enough for them to hit you again before you have time to defend yourself. Upon reaching level 9 you will arrive at the caverns, a scene made entirely of stone and rivers of lava. Sorry, I guess it's called magma because we are underground. Here, human architecture disappears completely except for some small wooden fences that you can find occasionally on the map. Also, as previously in the catacombs, you will find a staircase that leads you to the town through some rock near Worth. Enemies become much tougher. Besides some enemies from the previous maps, you can still encounter humanoid lava monsters and demons with a much more stereotypical form. Like these winged demons with a sword that they call Balrogs. I wonder where they got that name from. Or for example these other demons that attack you with electric magic. Finally, when you reach level 13, you arrive in Hell. The Hell scenario is as you would expect, a scene built with stone and bone surrounded by rivers of blood. It is also decorated with hundreds of mutilated bodies. Upon arriving here, the variety of enemies reduces drastically. You almost won't find any enemies from the previous levels, although it's possible. But the vast majority of the enemies will be armored warriors who are very resistant to magic and damage in general, in addition to some giant insectoid-looking demons. Also succubi who will attack you with a quite powerful magic though easy to dodge, and sorcerers who have a wider repertoire of spells than the average enemy. They are also able to teleport and randomly immune to some kinds of magic. Once we reach Hell, we can do the main mission, to find Archbishop Lazarus and try to rescue Prince Albrecht. But before proceeding with this, I think it's interesting to talk about the side missions and the information about the main plot that you find during your descent. The game has a total of 14 side missions, which are random and won't always appear every time you play. Not only they are random, but they are also programmed in a way that they are mutually exclusive. The missions are organized into 5 groups, and it is designed so one of the missions in the group never appears. Some groups have 3 side missions, so only 2 of them will appear, but other groups only have 2 missions, so if you do one, the other is guaranteed not to appear. An example seen almost at the beginning is the case of the Skeleton King mission or the Poison Underground Stream, which are assigned to you upon reaching level 2 in a very early stage of the game. This mechanic of random missions gives it a fairly decent replayability factor for a game that really doesn't have much content, so I think it's a good idea. Although I don't know if they have made some missions more likely than others, because I swear, for example, the Skeleton King mission only appears to me 1 of every 10 times. The side missions are quite simple, usually consisting of killing a special enemy or clearing an area. The Butcher mission involves killing the demon that wiped out most of the inhabitants of Tristram. It is difficult because it's the first boss of the game at a very early level, although you can always come back later when you are stronger. The Poison Water Supply mission consists of clearing an area of enemies so that a stream from which the inhabitants of Tristram draw water from their wells can be purified. The Curse of King Leoric involves defeating the Skeleton King in an area full of skeletons. You learn that King Leoric went mad when his youngest son disappeared and blamed the population of Tristram for kidnapping him. In the end, his own knights, seeing that he has lost his mind, murdered him. But now it seems that he has returned as a giant skeleton that controls an army of the dead. If you manage to defeat him, you obtain his crown. Garbat the Weak is an interesting mission, in which a goat man will ask you to spare his life in exchange for a powerful magical item he will forge for you. If you return after a while, he gives you a normal magical item as a sign of good faith and asks you to wait a little longer. Eventually he finishes the magical item and tells you that it's too powerful to give it to you, and if you want it, you will have to kill him for it. Ogden's Sign is another interesting mission. Walls surround the descent to the next level, and an enemy tells you that he will let you pass if you retrieve a banner that is protected by powerful enemies. When you recover the banner, you are ambushed and you will have to eliminate many enemies. The Magic Rock involves finding a rock somewhere on level 5 and giving it to Griswold, who in exchange will give you a unique ring. Arcane's Valor is activated by reading the Book of Blood. You will find a large but closed room. To open it, you will have to gather bloodstones that they are in chambers full of enemies. By gathering all of them, you will obtain Arcane's Valor, an armor that belonged to a hero from the past and that can be only obtained by a hero of the light who proves their worth. It's quite good for that level of the game, or for the whole game if you are a sorcerer, as it has no strength requirements. The Chamber of Bone is a mission activated by finding the Mythical Book, which speaks of a chamber full of magical treasures but also full of enemies. Adventurers who die in the Chamber of Bone become monsters that will defend it from other adventurers who come in the future. Basically it's a room you have to clear of enemies and it has quite a few magical items, which is appreciated in this game since there are not so many of them. The Halls of the Blind begins by reading the Book of the Blind on level 7. After this, you can enter a room with 2 chambers full of these invisible enemies that I like so much. You will also find the Optical Amulet, a unique item. On level 8, you will encounter Tsar the Mad. He is a sorcerer in a library. If you talk to him, he gets annoyed by the interruption and will give you a spellbook in exchange for leaving him alone. If you bother him again or steal the spellbook from his library, he will get completely angry and attack you. Well, honestly, for someone called the Mad, he seems pretty much more calm and understanding than the rest of the game's enemies. Here I am sorry, but I think the protagonist is acting like an idiot. The Black Mushroom is a slightly more complex mission than usual. On level 9, you will find a book called The Fungal Tome. If you give it to Adria, she will ask you to find a giant black mushroom in the labyrinth. Once you give it to her, she will tell you that Pepin the Healer needs a demon brain for an elixir he is preparing, which Adria also needs. The next enemy you kill will drop a brain. If you give it to Pepin, he will give you the elixir for Adria, but she will tell you that no longer wants it and you can keep it for yourself. This elixir is called the Spectral Elixir, permanently increases your 4 primary abilities. Interestingly, if you ask Cain about the black mushroom, he will say, "I know as much about black mushrooms as I do about red herrings." A quote that will become famous up to Diablo 3, as the black mushroom appears there again. In the Envol of Fury mission, you must rescue a magical anvil from the caverns and bring it to Griswold, who will use it to make you a pretty good weapon called Griswold's Edge. Once you reach Hell, there are only 2 more missions, which are mutually exclusive. The first one is the Warlord of Blood. where a knight will protect the stairs to the next level in a true none-shall-pass style of the Black Knight. If you defeat him, in addition to being able to continue the game, you will have access to a good number of magical weapons. The other option is Lakdanan. Here you meet a knight who, surprisingly, is not hostile and explains that he was once one of the King Leoric's knights, and specifically one of those who killed him when he went mad. He explains that he and his companions were cursed by the king before dying and asks you to find a potion that can save his soul from the curse. If you search the level, you will end up finding a golden elixir that causes him to disappear. And those are all the side missions. As you can see, the game is not too long. However, in addition to these missions, that already tell you something about the history of Tristram and King Leoric, during your journey you find a series of books, 9 in total, that will reveal some more about what's happening in that place. 3 of the books are written by an order called the Horadrim. Another 3 are written by Archbishop Lazarus himself, and the other 3, which also have more occult tone, are anonymous. In summary, the books reveal that there is a war between the forces of heaven and hell, apparently called the Sin War. The conflict escalated to a large scale and even affected the inhabitants of Earth, many of whom would end up joining one of the two sides. During the war, the 3 major demons of hell, Diablo, Mephisto and Baal, were expelled from hell and came to Earth. It was then that the Horadrim, an order tasked with hunting down evil for centuries, managed to imprison the 3 of them in a very powerful artifact called Soulstones and buried them in the distant lands of the East. But the youngest of the 3 demons, Diablo, managed to escape and fled west, where the Horadrim also captured him and sealed him in a soulstone and buried it deep beneath a forgotten cathedral. So now it's a cathedral? Sometimes they call it cathedral and sometimes church. I guess it doesn't matter. During this time, Diablo tried to tempt those he could host, and thus managed to make contact with Archbishop Lazarus. Diablo tempted Lazarus by promising him great power, but in order to manifest outside the Soulstone he will need a body, preferably a weak one, like that of a child or an elderly person. Initially Lazarus tried to use the king's body, but he resisted possession, though he went mad in the process. Then he decided to kidnap his son, Albrecht, to offer him as a sacrifice. And this is all we know of the main story up to the point of reaching hell, but once here several things happen. The first is that we find Lazarus' staff. If you show it to Cain, he will confess that he is not just a storyteller, but he is actually named Deckard Cain and he is a member of the Horadrim, and suspects that Diablo has obtained a physical body, likely the one from Prince Albrecht, and that you must destroy it. Soon after you find Lazarus next to an altar with a sacrificed youth. In one of the only 2 cutscenes of the game, Lazarus gives you the typical bad guy speech that you have arrived too late and blah blah blah. After you deal with him, Cain tells you that the description of the sacrificed boy doesn't match the prince, and that he may still be alive. Finally, you reach level 16, the last level of the game, where the difficulty increases tremendously. The enemies here are very tough, and especially in a quantity never seen before. Diablo is located inside a closed room. To open it, you will have to activate 4 levers. This will make the walls of the room disappear so you can face him. Also, if you have a teleport spell, you can enter the room directly, although it's not recommended as there are so many enemies in such a small place that the chances of survival are slim. Diablo himself is not as difficult as one might expect. I found it more challenging to eliminate the large number of enemies. Additionally, some were immune to one type of magic or other, and in the end I had to consume several dozens of potions to survive. When you kill Diablo, you see that he has the soulstone embedded in his forehead, and upon removing it the demon's body dissolves, turning into the corpse of Prince Albrecht. Then the protagonist does something quite surprising, shoving the stone into his own forehead. Finally, another cutscene explains that you place the stone in yourself to control Diablo's power, as that was the only way you could be sure that it wouldn't affect others. Then the protagonist decides that he must travel east to find the other 2 soulstones and secure them. It doesn't seem like a good idea, since they've been there peacefully for centuries. But who am I kidding? By this point we all know what happened next. Although when you finish the game, the hero who sacrifices himself to control Diablo is either the sorcerer, the rogue or the warrior. According to the canon, it was the warrior who decided to take on that responsibility. Interestingly, the warrior you play in the game is supposed to be King Leoric's eldest son, Priest Aidan, which makes it more dramatic that his younger brother was possessed by Diablo and he had to kill his own father in skeleton form. The other two heroes were also corrupted by Diablo's power. The rogue became Blood Raven, one of the first bosses in Diablo 2, and the sorcerer built his own evil pocket dimension and became the Summoner, another famous boss in Diablo 2. This means that, although it's an interesting story, everything that happened in this game has been for nothing, because if the heroes hadn't stopped Diablo, he would have escaped and freed his brother just as happened in Diablo 2 anyway. After playing the game, I have several things I would like to criticize, although many of the things I will talk about have been already addressed in later releases of the game. Regarding the mechanics, I think they are quite well done. In fact, this game format has survived to this very day. But changing magic or skills is complicated. With the other two characters who barely learn spells, there is no problem. But with the sorcerer, having to switch between several spells can be quite tedious, and usually enemies end up having plenty of time to attack you. Learning spells from randomly appearing books seems to me one of the silliest things that they could have done. I know that this is partially for keeping the randomness mechanic of the game, making you want to play it over and over to eventually have all the spells. But usually level 4 spells are going to be almost impossible to find unless you stand in front of Adria reloading the game over and over to reset her inventory. Another problem I see with the game is that you move insufferably slow. It takes forever to get from one place to another, and that's not bad when you are in the labyrinth since there are monster traps and you want to make sure to explore everything. But when you have to go back to town or navigate through it to buy equipment, it's horrible and you lose many valuable minutes. In fact, in the expansion they released later, called Hellfire, they implemented a much higher movement speed that only worked in town. It's a shame that there is no kind of stash or place to store things, although you can always throw them on the ground and nothing's happened, but it seems disrespectful to me throw your unique items on the ground. With the issue of gold, I have mixed feelings. On one hand, I like that gold has a physical representation in the inventory. I mean, isn't it unrealistic that in role-playing games, gold, caps, coins or whatever you use doesn't take up space or weight? Have you ever put 5,000 soda bottle caps in a bag and tied it to your waist? And gold, let me tell you, because gold in large quantities is incredibly heavy. They could have solved this with some kind of stash system as I mentioned before, or having one of the NPCs act as a banker. Or simply by making you receive fewer gold coins in the game, but also making items cost less. That way, good items will not cost 25,000 gold, but only instead 2,500, but you will receive much less gold while playing. The ratio will remain the same, and in the end you don't end up with an inventory that is 50% gold and 50% potions. Regarding potions, you can carry 8 on your belt, and also you can use those in your inventory by right-clicking on them. My only complaint is that you need too many. There is no automatic health or mana regeneration, which means you completely depend on potions, which you will end up chugging 2 or 3 at a time quite frequently, making you spend almost more time going to buy them than killing monsters. Continuing with some criticism, I would like to comment on the special skills of the characters. Each character has one of them that doesn't require mana. The warrior can repair weapons and armor. The sorcerer can recharge the spell charges in magic stabs. And the rogue can detect and disarm traps. Conceptually this is very cool, but in practice is useless. Items deteriorate with use. They have a durability attribute that if it reaches 0, the weapon or armor will be destroyed and disappear forever. Griswold the blacksmith repairs weapons and armor to make them as good as new for a price. If you use the warrior's ability, you can repair the weapon for free, but at the cost of losing a piece of the total durability, which means it is now weaker and it will deteriorate faster than before. If you do this several times, the piece of equipment ends up breaking down as soon as you use it a few times. The same happens with the sorcerer recharge ability. Each time you recharge your stuff, you reduce the total number of charges it has until eventually it has only one charge left, and you will have to use the recharge ability every time you use it. The rogue ability is different. It's not as useless as the others. Basically, if you use it, you can place the mouse over a chest or a door to see if it's trapped. If it is, you can attempt to disarm it. The more dexterity you have, the easier it is to disarm it. If you fail, you will trigger the trap. It's a cool mechanic, but the problem is that there really aren't that many traps. And the ones that exist aren't dangerous and hardly do any damage. It would be another thing if it could disarm explosive barrels, but no. Now let's talk about another topic I mentioned earlier, the variety of enemies. Actually, for a game from that time, it doesn't even have a bad variety of enemies, What's a pity is that instead of creating new designs, they fell into the typical cliché of using the same enemy but with a coat of paint and more hit points. Lastly, I find the game's story very interesting and well narrated, although, as I already mentioned, it's not entirely clear when these events happen. Because if you have to rescue the prince, then it seems all these incidents with the king and the archbishop happened very recently. Yet, we find people who have just been killed by the butcher, but the kid with the wooden leg, for example, already has his wounds healed. So that means that there are citizens who continue to go in the labyrinth for fun. Also, did the king have enough time to become a skeleton, or was it magic? Because otherwise he should be the zombie king, not the skeleton king. And another thing that makes me think that everything must have happened just before you arrive is that if Diablo already had a physical body, what was he doing stuck in the cathedral instead of going out to free his brothers? Was he afraid of Cain? I don't understand anything. Despite all this, I believe that Diablo is a game that, although it wasn't the first of its kind, did a lot of right things and served as a model for many RPGs in the future. Unfortunately, Diablo franchise itself, much like the town of Tristram, ended up being corrupt and assimilated by evil powers. So, is it Diablo still a good game?